The verdict. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Concordat stretched 3 kilometers in diameter, its crystalline dome reflecting the light of 1,000 worlds. Ambassador Kalen Vross stood at the center of the circular chamber, surrounded by the representatives of 473 species. Above him, holographic displays showed his face to every corner of the vast space. He had rehearsed this moment for months. Humanity's application to join the Concordat as a full member had taken 15 years to process. 15 years of diplomatic missions, cultural exchanges, and economic partnerships. 15 years of proving that humanity deserved a seat at the galactic table. Chancellor Thrace, a towering Velcorian with scales that shimmered like liquid mercury, raised his ceremonial staff. The chamber fell silent. "We have deliberated for 3 cycles," Thrace's voice rumbled through the translation fields. "The application of the human species for full Concordat membership has been reviewed, debated, and analyzed. We now call for the final vote." Kalen felt his heart hammering. Beside him, his aide, Dr. Mira Chin, squeezed his arm reassuringly. They had the votes. They had to. The Etherians supported them. The Krell had publicly endorsed humanity. Even the notoriously isolationist Chin had indicated favorable leanings. All those in favor of granting humanity full membership status, activate your voting crystal. Kalen watched the great board above the Chancellor's platform. Each species had a crystal that would glow blue for approval. He waited for the cascade of blue light. 1 blue crystal appeared. Then another. Kalen counted them, his mouth going dry. 3, 4, 5. Then the light stopped. 5 approvals out of 473 votes. All those opposed. The chamber erupted in crimson light. 468 red crystals blazed like angry stars. The remaining species abstained, their crystals dark and silent. Myra's hand fell away from his arm. Kalen heard her sharp intake of breath, but the sound seemed to come from very far away. The chamber spun around him as the enormity of the rejection crashed down. Chancellor Thrace struck his staff against the resonance plate. By overwhelming majority, humanity's application for membership is denied. Furthermore. He paused, his multifaceted eyes fixing on Kalen with something that might have been regret. The Council moves to impose sanctions. Sanctions? Kalen's voice cracked. On what grounds? Humanity is deemed a Category 5 developmental risk, Thrace announced. Your species exhibits dangerous tendencies toward aggression, environmental destruction, and technological recklessness. Effective immediately, all human vessels are restricted to your home system. All trade agreements are suspended. All diplomatic channels are reduced to emergency-only status. You have 30 solar days to recall all human citizens from Concordat space. The words landed like physical blows. Kalen staggered, gripping the podium. We've done everything you asked. We ended our wars. We cleaned our planet. We've been peaceful for over a century. Your history speaks louder than your recent actions, came a voice from the Xinthian delegation. A species that nearly destroyed its own world cannot be trusted with the greater galaxy. You are too young, too volatile, added a Hyverian representative. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, when you have truly evolved past your primitive instincts. Kalen looked around desperately, seeking any ally. The 5 blue crystals belonged to the Etherians, the Krell, 2 minor worlds, and 1 independent colony. Not nearly enough. This is wrong, he said quietly, then louder. This is wrong. We deserve a chance to prove ourselves. You had your chance, Thrace said not unkindly. You spent it warring among yourselves while the rest of us built a civilization among the stars. The vote is final. You are dismissed, Ambassador Vross. The return journey to Earth took 6 weeks. Kalen barely spoke during the entire voyage. When their ship finally entered Earth's orbit and he saw the blue marble below, he felt something shift inside him. They had been rejected, contained, sanctioned. The galaxy had looked at humanity and found them wanting. The news spread across Earth within hours. Protests erupted in every major city. Some called for war, for defiance. But cooler heads prevailed. Admiral Sarah Takashi, the head of Earth's unified military, gave a speech that was broadcast worldwide. We have been judged and found lacking, she said, standing in front of the United Earth Council. But they have made a mistake. They have given us something invaluable, time. They think we need 1,000 years to prove ourselves? We'll do it in 100. We will build our own civilization. We will advance our own technology. And when we emerge from our own star system a century from now, we will be so far beyond them that they will beg us to join their Concordat. It was a bold promise. Some called it foolish bravado. But it gave humanity something it desperately needed: purpose. The isolation began immediately. Human colonies on the edge of Concordat space were evacuated. Trade ships were turned away. The few humans living on alien worlds were given 45 days to return home or renounce their citizenship. Most came home. Kalen Vross resigned his ambassadorship. He couldn't face returning to that chamber ever again. But he didn't disappear from public life. Instead, he became one of the architects of what would be called the Centennial Project. "They rejected us because of our past," he said in his first public speech after returning to Earth. "So we will create a future so magnificent that the past becomes irrelevant." 100 years. That's all we need. 100 years of focused development, of pushing our limits, of becoming the species we always knew we could be. Dr. Mira Chin stood beside him at that podium. She had something else to add. "They feared our aggression, our recklessness, our destructive tendencies. Let's prove them right to fear us, but for the wrong reasons. Let's become so advanced, so powerful, so indispensable that they'll regret ever turning us away." The applause that followed was thunderous. Humanity had its mission. The first year of isolation was the hardest. Earth's economy, which had begun to integrate with galactic markets, collapsed. Unemployment skyrocketed. Resources that had been imported from off-world suddenly became scarce. But humanity adapted. They always did. Massive investments poured into education and research. Every human child learned mathematics, engineering, and at least 3 sciences before they turned 12. Universities expanded exponentially. The brightest minds from every nation collaborated on projects that had once seemed impossible. And in the darkness of their isolation, cut off from the galaxy that had rejected them, humanity began to build. The Awakening. Dr. Elias Kane stared at the equation flickering on his holographic display and felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It was 3 in the morning at the Kepler research station orbiting Neptune, and he had been working for 18 hours straight. But he wasn't tired. He was electrified. "Run it again," he told the station's AI. "Triple-check the mathematics." The AI, a sophisticated quantum computer named Aria, responded instantly. "Calculations verified. The theoretical framework is sound, Dr. Kane. Based on these principles, faster-than-light travel is not only possible but relatively straightforward once the correct energy-matter resonance is achieved." Elias laughed, a slightly manic sound in the empty laboratory. 23 years had passed since the Concordat's rejection. 23 years of humanity working in isolation, pushing the boundaries of science without the guidance or restrictions of the established galactic powers. And now this. The alien species traveled faster than light using what they called slip drives, pulling ships through higher dimensional spaces. The technology was closely guarded, licensed out at astronomical prices, and heavily restricted. Humanity had been denied access to even the basic principles. So Elias had started from scratch, working from pure theory. And he had found something the aliens had apparently missed. Slip drives weren't the only way to exceed light speed. They weren't even the most efficient way. Aria, begin fabrication of the prototype assembly. Use the specifications I uploaded last week. Initiating fabrication sequence. Estimated completion time, 47 hours. Elias opened a communication channel to Earth. Given the lightspeed delay, he wouldn't receive a response for hours, but he couldn't wait. "Director Okonkwo, this is Kane. I need you to authorize a test flight. We're going to Alpha Centauri and we're going to do it in less than a day." 4 months later, the vessel designated Breakthrough accelerated away from Saturn's orbit. It was a small ship, barely 50 meters long with a crew of 3. Elias Kane stood on the bridge alongside Pilot Commander Gene Park and Engineer Lieutenant Amara Osei. "All systems nominal," Amara reported, her fingers dancing across the control interfaces. "The resonance drive is charging. We'll be ready to engage in 30 seconds. Elias felt his pulse quicken. If his calculations were correct, they were about to change everything. If he was wrong, they would probably die in a spectacular fashion as their ship was torn apart at the molecular level. 20 seconds, Jean said calmly. She had the steady nerves of someone who had piloted experimental craft through situations that would terrify most people. 15. 10. Engaging resonance drive, Amara announced. The universe twisted. That was the only way Elias could describe it later. The stars seemed to bend around them, and for a moment that lasted both an instant and an eternity, he felt as though he could see every possible path through space-time simultaneously. Then they were somewhere else. The familiar yellow glow of Sol was gone, replaced by the distinctive binary system of Alpha Centauri. Holy! Jean whispered. We did it. We actually did it. Transit time, 12.3 hours, Arya reported. Location confirmed, Alpha Centauri system. Navigational accuracy, 99.7%. Elias sat down heavily in his chair, his legs suddenly weak. The fastest slip-drive ships in the Concordat took 4 days to cover the same distance. They had done it in half a day with a prototype built in less than 5 months. Take us home, he said. It's time to tell everyone that humanity just became a spacefaring civilization on its own terms. The announcement of the resonance drive sent shockwaves through human civilization. Within 2 years, shipyards across the Sol system were producing vessels equipped with the new technology. Humanity began exploring nearby star systems, not as supplicants hoping for scraps from the galactic community, but as pioneers charting their own course. They found worlds, dozens of them. Planets that the Concordat had surveyed and dismissed as unsuitable for habitation. But humanity had spent decades learning to terraform Earth's recovering ecosystem. They had the technology and the determination to make harsh worlds livable. The colony ships began launching in the 30th year of isolation. Mars had been terraformed to the point of being self-sustaining. 3 moons of Jupiter hosted thriving underground cities. And now humanity reached beyond. The first extrasolar colony was established on a world they named New Vancouver, orbiting a star 37 light-years from Earth. It had a toxic atmosphere and crushing gravity, but also abundant resources and a stable orbit. Within 5 years, 3 million humans called it home. More colonies followed. New Shanghai, Nova Brazil, New Lagos, Asimov Station. Each one carefully chosen, developed, and populated. The Concordat had wanted humanity contained in one star system. Instead, humanity built an empire of 50 systems within 50 years. But it wasn't just expansion that defined those decades. It was innovation. Dr. Yuki Tanaka revolutionized energy production with her matter phase reactor, creating power sources 10 times more efficient than anything the Concordat used. Her reactors produced zero waste and could be scaled from handheld devices to city-sized installations. The Zhao brothers, Lin and Wei, cracked the code on gravity manipulation, leading to technology that made artificial gravity fields precise enough to perform surgery and powerful enough to move asteroids. And then there was the Nexus. The Nexus was humanity's answer to the quantum communication networks the Concordat used. But while alien quantum comms required expensive relay stations and had limited bandwidth, the Nexus operated on principles of quantum entanglement that allowed instantaneous communication across unlimited distances with infinite bandwidth. We're not just catching up, Director Amara Okonkwo told the United Earth Council in the 45th year of isolation. We're leaping ahead. Our ships are faster. Our energy is cleaner. Our communications are better. And we're doing all of this without access to the galactic economy or their technology. What happens when the 100 years are up? One counselor asked. Do we rejoin the Concordat? Okonkwo smiled, a sharp expression that held no warmth. We'll extend them an invitation to join us. If they qualify. In the Concordat space, the great powers barely noticed humanity's absence at first. A minor species confined to their home system wasn't worth much attention. But as the decades passed, some began to wonder. Chancellor Thrace, now elderly even by Velcorian standards, reviewed intelligence reports from the border regions with growing unease. Long-range scans detected human ships moving between stars at impossible speeds. There were signs of colonies and systems the Concordat had deemed worthless. And there were whispers, unconfirmed but persistent, that humanity was developing weapons technology that made Concordat military vessels look like toys. Perhaps we should have given them a chance, his aide suggested during one late-night briefing. Thrace shook his head. It's been less than 50 years. Barely a moment in galactic terms. Whatever they're doing in their isolation, it cannot compare to our millennia of accumulated knowledge and civilization. But even as he said it, Thrace felt a cold uncertainty settling in his chest. The rise. On the 75th anniversary of humanity's rejection, Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, humanity's first true warship, and watched as his fleet assembled around him. 300 vessels, each equipped with technology that would have seemed like magic a century ago, hung in perfect formation above Earth. This wasn't a military exercise. This was a statement. Sir, all ships report ready, his first officer, Commander Zara Patel, announced. Marcus nodded. He was a tall man with silver streaking his dark hair, a veteran of the resource wars that had preceded humanity's unification. Those conflicts seemed like ancient history now, but they had taught him valuable lessons about strategy, sacrifice, and the will to survive. "Begin the demonstration," he ordered. What followed was a display of power that was simultaneously broadcast to every human colony and, through carefully positioned drones, to select locations along the Concordat border. The fleet executed maneuvers that should have been impossible. Simultaneous faster-than-light microjumps that allowed them to appear and disappear across thousands of kilometers. Gravity manipulation that bent space itself into defensive barriers. And weapons tests that cracked asteroids into dust with a precision that left the dust particles arranged in perfect geometric patterns. "They're watching," Zara said quietly, monitoring the intelligence feeds. "Concordat border stations are scrambling their analysis teams." "Good," Marcus replied. "Let them watch. Let them see what a Category 5 developmental risk looks like when you give it 75 years and a reason to exceed every expectation." The demonstration wasn't meant to intimidate, though it certainly did that. It was meant to send a message: humanity is no longer the species you rejected. We have become something new. In the Kepler Research Station, now a massive facility housing 50,000 scientists and their families, Dr. Elias Kane was working on his next breakthrough. The resonance drive had been his first triumph. But he had spent the following decades exploring other implications of the fundamental forces he had uncovered. "Arya, display the test results from the Phase 4 trials." The AI projected a three-dimensional model of what looked like a bubble of distorted spacetime. The dimensional stabilizer successfully maintained a pocket universe for 72 hours before intentional collapse. No exotic matter required. Energy consumption was within acceptable parameters. Elias felt that familiar tingle of discovery. Pocket dimensions. Not for travel like the Concordat slip drives, but for storage. Imagine a ship that could carry cargo or even entire cities within a space no larger than a closet. Imagine weapons that could deploy entire fleets from what appeared to be a single vessel. "How long until we can scale this up?" he asked. "Based on current projections, functional applications could be developed within 18 months. Make it 12. We have 25 years left, and I'm not finished revolutionizing physics yet." Not all of humanity's advances were in hard science. The isolation had also forced cultural and social evolution. With no external markets to rely on, humanity had developed an economy built on collaboration rather than competition. Resources were allocated based on need and potential contribution to society. It wasn't a utopia. There were still conflicts and disagreements, but the existential threat of galactic rejection had unified humanity in ways that centuries of conflict never could. Education had become universal and lifelong. Every human had access to the accumulated knowledge of their species and the tools to contribute to it. The concept of meaningless labor had been eliminated. Automation handled routine tasks, freeing humans to pursue research, art, exploration, or whatever else called to them. "We're not just building technology," Dr. Mirachin said during a global broadcast marking the 75th anniversary. "We're building a civilization that deserves the technology we're creating." The Concordat feared we were too aggressive, too divided, too destructive. They were right to fear us, but we've transformed that fear into something they never imagined: a unified species with unlimited potential. She was older now, her black hair streaked with silver, but her eyes still burned with the same fierce intelligence that had sustained Kalen Vross through humanity's darkest moment. Kalen himself had passed away 5 years earlier, but not before seeing humanity establish its 50th colony world. "In 25 years, when our isolation ends, we won't go crawling back to the Concordat begging for membership," Mira continued. "We'll stand as equals. As partners if they're wise enough to accept us. Or as competitors if they're foolish enough to reject us again." The response from humanity's billions was unanimous: defiant pride. They had taken their rejection and transformed it into rocket fuel for advancement. But it wasn't all progress and triumph. There were costs. Thousands had died in experimental accidents. Colonies had failed. Ships had been lost exploring unknown regions of space. The aggressive push for advancement had demanded sacrifice, and humanity had paid it willingly. In a cemetery on the dark side of Luna, a memorial stood listing the names of every person who had died in the Centennial Project. It was a sobering reminder that greatness always came with a price. Admiral Webb visited that memorial after the fleet demonstration. He stood in the reduced gravity, reading names, remembering faces. Some of them had served under his command. Others had been friends, colleagues, rivals. Was it worth it? Zara asked, standing beside him. Marcus thought about that question for a long time. "Ask me again in 25 years. If we've built something lasting, something that ensures humanity never has to bow to anyone else's judgment of our worth, then yes. Every name on this wall will have meant something. He touched his hand to the cold stone. But we can't waste their sacrifice. We have to finish what we started. Far from Sol, in a system humanity had designated as Outpost Sentinel, Commander Lisa Nakamura oversaw the construction of something that would have terrified the Concordat if they had known about it. A weapons platform capable of projecting a defensive field across an entire star system. The technology combined gravity manipulation, dimensional phase shifting, and exotic energy matrices. If an attacking fleet entered the system, they would find themselves suddenly dealing with spatial distortions that made faster-than-light travel impossible, communications unreliable, and conventional weapons mostly useless. This is defensive technology, Lisa told her engineering team during the final installation phase. But defense of this magnitude is indistinguishable from offense. We're building tools that could neutralize an entire Concordat battle fleet without firing a single shot. Do you think it'll come to that? Asked one of the engineers. War with the Concordat? Lisa shrugged. I think the Concordat has spent 10,000 years believing they're the apex of galactic civilization. When they realize a species they dismissed as primitive has surpassed them in less than a century, they're going to have a choice. Accept the new reality or try to suppress it. We need to be ready for either option. The defensive platforms were just one aspect of humanity's military development. Research into weapon systems had produced innovations the Concordat had never imagined. Not because humans were inherently more violent, but because they approached warfare from a different perspective. The Concordat's military doctrine was based on 10,000 years of conflict resolution and deterrence. Their weapons were designed to be powerful enough to threaten but controlled enough to allow diplomatic solutions. It was war as a formalized dance, with understood rules and accepted boundaries. Humanity had no interest in formalized warfare. They had learned from their own bloody history that wars were won not by playing fair but by making the cost of conflict too high to bear. Their weapons weren't designed to threaten. They were designed to win, absolutely and overwhelmingly. But humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology. It was adaptability. We've spent 75 years learning to thrive in isolation, Director Okonkwo said during a strategic planning session. We've built infrastructure, technology, and culture without depending on anyone else. The Concordat species have relied on each other for millennia. They've forgotten how to be truly self-sufficient. That's our advantage. We don't need them, but we're starting to suspect they might need us. In the 80th year of isolation, the first Concordat ship violated the border restriction in decades. It was a small scientific vessel that claimed engine trouble, but everyone knew it was actually a reconnaissance mission. The ship's crew spent 3 weeks at a human border station, undergoing repairs and undoubtedly gathering as much intelligence as possible. When they departed, Admiral Webb received a detailed report from the station commander. They were shocked, the commander wrote. Not just by our technology, though that certainly surprised them. They were shocked by us. By how unified we are. By how purposeful. One of their crew members told me, off the record, that we reminded him of the ancient Velkorian Empire before it fell to internal division 3,000 years ago. He meant it as a compliment and a warning. Marcus filed that report away. It confirmed what he had suspected. The galaxy was starting to notice that humanity was no longer the species they had rejected. The rumbling. The Concordat High Council convened in emergency session for the first time in 200 years. The crystalline chamber that had once witnessed humanity's rejection now hosted a very different debate. Chancellor Thrace was long dead, replaced by Chancellor Vera, a Hyverian whose species were known for their strategic thinking and long-term planning. She studied the holographic displays floating before the assembled delegates with growing alarm. "Let me ensure I understand correctly," she said, her translated voice carefully neutral. "This human species, which we sanctioned and contained 83 years ago, now controls 57 star systems, possesses faster-than-light technology superior to our own, has established trade relationships with 14 independent worlds along our border, and has military capabilities that our intelligence services describe as potentially existential threats to Concordat security." "That is correct, Chancellor," responded Director Cax, head of the Concordat Intelligence Service. He was a Xinthian, a species that looked like mobile crystalline structures, and his usual cool demeanor was notably absent. Furthermore, they've done all of this without any external support or guidance. Every technology they possess was developed independently. "How is that possible?" demanded Representative Korch of the Krell Directorate. "We have had 10,000 years to refine our technology. How could they surpass us in less than a century?" Because they weren't refining, Cax replied. They were inventing. They approached every problem from first principles, without preconceptions or established paradigms to limit their thinking. And they had motivation we've never experienced, existential rejection by the entire galactic community. Vera called up a specific report. It says here that their resonance drive operates on principles our physicists claim are theoretically impossible. Our physicists are wrong, Cax said bluntly. The human's drive exists and works. We have confirmed reports of human vessels traveling from Sol to their outer colonies in hours, not days. They've made our slip drive technology obsolete. Then we acquire the technology, suggested Representative Thace, descendant of the former chancellor. Through trade or other means. We tried, Cax admitted. 3 times, operatives have attempted to infiltrate human research facilities. All 3 attempts failed. Human security is exceptional. And their AI systems are far more sophisticated than ours. They can identify infiltrators with near-perfect accuracy. 3 infiltration attempts? Vera's tone sharpened. We've committed acts of espionage against them? The Council authorized covert intelligence gathering 10 years ago, Cax replied carefully. The humans know about the attempts. They've filed formal protests through the diplomatic channels we left open. Channels they rarely use. What do they want? Vera asked. Have they made demands? Threatened retaliation? That's what concerns me most, Cax said. They've made no demands. No threats. They simply exist, expanding steadily, developing new technologies at an alarming rate and watching us. It's as if they're waiting for something. They're waiting for the 100-year mark, said a new voice. The speaker was Ambassador Lyran of the Etherian Collective, one of the 5 species that had voted in favor of humanity's membership 8 decades ago. When Ambassador Vross left our chamber, he told me privately that humanity would prove itself in a century. Not 1,000 years as we suggested. 100. That deadline is 17 years away. And when it arrives? Vera asked. I believe they will emerge from their isolation and demand recognition as equals. And we will have no grounds to refuse them. The chamber erupted in agitated discussion. The idea of a species less than a century spacefaring being equal to civilizations that had navigated the stars for millennia was almost insulting. But the data didn't lie. There's something else, Cax said, waiting for silence. Our analysts have identified a pattern in human expansion. They're not settling randomly. They're establishing a perimeter. Every colony, every outpost, every defensive station is positioned to create a sphere of influence that will, in approximately 20 years, encircle a volume of space containing 300 potentially habitable systems. He displayed a 3-dimensional map. The human colonies glowed blue, their defensive platforms amber, their patrol routes red. Together they formed a network that was clearly deliberate. They're building an empire, breathed Representative Korch. Right on our border. Not an empire, corrected Ambassador Lyran. A shield. Look at the positioning. It's defensive, not aggressive. They're creating a buffer zone between themselves and us. They don't trust us and they're making sure we can't threaten them. Can we? Vera asked Cax directly. If we decided tomorrow that humanity represented an unacceptable threat, could we neutralize them militarily? The silence that followed was damning. No, Cax finally said. Not without catastrophic losses. Human ships are faster, their weapons more advanced, and their defensive technology unlike anything we've encountered. A war with humanity would cost us thousands of ships and potentially millions of lives. And we're not certain we would win. The chamber fell silent. The representatives stared at the holographic displays showing human territories, human ships, human capabilities. This was not how the galaxy was supposed to work. Young species were supposed to learn from elder ones, to climb slowly up the ladder of civilization, to earn their place over centuries. Humanity had torn up that script and written their own. What are our options? Vera asked. We have 3, Cax replied. First, we could attempt a preemptive strike, trying to cripple their infrastructure before they become even stronger. I've outlined why that would likely fail and cost us dearly. Second, we could attempt diplomacy, trying to establish a relationship before the 100-year mark arrives. Or third, we wait and hope they're content to remain in their corner of the galaxy. The third option assumes they have no ambitions, Representative Thace said. Every species has ambitions. And we gave humanity 83 years to nurture theirs in isolation. Who knows what they want now? Ambassador Lyran spoke again. I know what they want. I've maintained informal communications with human diplomats throughout their isolation. They want what every species wants: recognition, security, and respect. We denied them all three. The question isn't what they want. The question is whether we're wise enough to give it to them before they take it. In the Sol system, Director Amara Okonkwo received the intelligence report with satisfaction. They had suspected the Concordat was watching, but confirmation was always useful. "They're nervous," she told her advisory council, a group of scientists, military leaders, and diplomats. "Good. Fear makes people careful. Careful people don't make rash decisions." "Should we reach out?" asked Ambassador Reese Nakano, who had taken over humanity's diplomatic corps. "Extend an olive branch?" "Not yet," Amara replied. "We have 17 years until the centennial. Let them stew. Let them worry. Let them realize that the species they dismissed is now beyond their ability to threaten or control. When we're ready, when we've achieved everything we set out to do, then we'll talk." "And if they attack first?" Admiral Webb asked. "Then we defend ourselves and show them exactly why that was a mistake," Amara said coldly. "But I don't think they will. They're politicians and bureaucrats. They'll debate and deliberate until our deadline arrives. And by then, it will be too late for anything except acceptance." Dr. Elias Kane, now elderly but still brilliant, added his perspective. "The technology gap is widening, not closing. Every year we pull further ahead. In 17 years, the Concordat will be so far behind us that military conflict would be pointless. They'll have to accept us or become irrelevant." "That's not enough," Mirachin said. She was the eldest member of the council now, her face lined with age but her mind still sharp. "We can't just be superior. We need to be indispensable. We need to create something the Concordat needs, something they can't get anywhere else." "What did you have in mind?" Amara asked. Mira smiled. "The Concordat has been dealing with the Nexus plague for 300 years. It's a quantum-based virus that affects their communication networks. They've managed to contain it but never cure it. It costs them millions every year in lost productivity and damaged infrastructure." "And you think we can cure it?" Elias asked, intrigued. "I think our understanding of quantum mechanics is sophisticated enough that we might solve a problem they've been struggling with for centuries. And if we do, if we cure their plague, they'll have to acknowledge that we're not just equals. We're potentially saviors." The council considered this. It was ambitious. It was risky. It was exactly the kind of bold move that had defined humanity's last 83 years. "Make it happen," Amara ordered. "We have 17 years to become not just powerful but indispensable. Let's show the galaxy what humanity can really do." The solution. Dr. Hikaru Sato stood in the Quantum Research Laboratory on New Vancouver, staring at the simulation of the Nexus plague with intense concentration. Around him, a team of 50 researchers worked at their stations, their faces illuminated by holographic displays showing incomprehensibly complex quantum algorithms. "Run Scenario 773, Hikaru ordered. He was young for such a senior position, only 37, but he had been bred for this work. His parents had both been quantum physicists, and he had been solving differential equations before he could properly read. The simulation executed. For a moment it looked promising. The viral quantum structure began to destabilize, breaking apart as the theoretical cure propagated through the network. Then, catastrophically, the cure itself became corrupted, transforming into something even worse than the original plague. "Failure," Arya announced unnecessarily. The cure mutated into a more aggressive form within 12 microseconds. "That's the problem," Hikaru muttered, rubbing his tired eyes. "The plague isn't just a virus. It's adaptive. It learns from each attempt to fight it. The Concordat has been attacking it the same way for 3 centuries, and all they've done is make it stronger." "So what's your approach?" asked Dr. Kenji Zhao, one of the engineers working on the hardware aspects of the problem. "We don't attack it," Hikaru said, an idea suddenly crystallizing in his mind. "We don't fight it at all. We make peace with it." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him. "Explain," Kenji said carefully. "The Nexus plague is a quantum entity. It exists in probabilistic states, adapting and evolving. Every time you try to eliminate it, it shifts to avoid destruction. But what if we didn't try to eliminate it? What if we gave it what it wants?" "What does a quantum virus want?" someone asked skeptically. "To propagate. To exist. To maintain coherence." Hikaru's hands flew across his interface, sketching out a new approach. "What if we created a quantum environment where the plague could exist harmlessly? A sandbox where it thinks it's propagating but actually it's isolated, unable to affect critical systems." "You want to negotiate with a virus?" Kenji looked doubtful. I want to outthink it. The plague is sophisticated, but it's still operating on algorithms. Algorithms can be predicted, manipulated, directed. We create an environment so perfect for the plague that it migrates there willingly, abandoning infected systems. The team spent 6 months developing what they called the quantum sanctuary. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, a self-contained quantum network that mimicked the Concordat's communication infrastructure perfectly, but existed in an isolated state. The plague would detect it, attempt to infect it, and find itself trapped in a loop of endless propagation that went nowhere. Testing began on a small scale. They deliberately infected a human quantum relay with a sample of the Nexus plague that the Etherians had provided. The infection spread rapidly, disrupting communications exactly as predicted. Then they activated the sanctuary. For 3 tense hours nothing happened. Then gradually the infection began to recede. The plague was migrating to the sanctuary, drawn by what it perceived as a vastly superior environment. Within 12 hours the original relay was clean. The plague existed entirely within the sanctuary, happily propagating in its quantum paradise, completely unaware it had been imprisoned. It works, Kenji whispered, watching the data stream. It actually works. Scale it up, Hikaru ordered. If this works on one relay, it'll work on the entire Concordat network. We've just cured a 300-year-old plague in 6 months. The news reached the United Earth Council within hours. Director Okonkwo immediately understood the implications. We don't announce this publicly, she ordered. Not yet. This is our bargaining chip. When the 100-year mark arrives, we'll present this to the Concordat as a gift. Proof that humanity isn't just powerful but valuable. That we can solve problems they can't. But secrets in the space age were hard to keep. 2 years later, intelligence reports indicated that the Concordat had learned about the Sanctuary project. Not the details, but enough to know that humanity claimed to have a cure for the Nexus plague. The Concordat's response was swift. Chancellor Vera sent an official communication, the first formal diplomatic contact in nearly 90 years. To the government of United Earth, the message began. We understand you have developed a potential solution to the Nexus plague. We request permission to send a scientific delegation to verify these claims. In return, we are prepared to discuss normalized diplomatic relations. Amara Okonkwo read the message 3 times, then smiled. They're coming to us. They're asking us for help. This is exactly what we needed. The response was carefully crafted. The United Earth is willing to receive a Concordat delegation. However, we will not share the cure technology. Instead, we will deploy it throughout Concordat space ourselves, free of charge. Consider it a demonstration of good faith from a species you once called a Category 5 developmental risk. It was a power move and everyone knew it. Humanity wasn't negotiating as supplicants. They were dictating terms. 3 months later, a Concordat delegation arrived at the border of human space. They were escorted by human vessels to New Vancouver, where Dr. Hikaru Sato and his team were prepared to demonstrate the sanctuary technology. The delegation was led by Chancellor Vera herself, along with representatives from 20 major Concordat species. They gathered in the laboratory, watching as Hikaru activated the sanctuary on a deliberately infected network. The Nexus plague operates through quantum entanglement, Hikaru explained, his voice amplified to reach every delegate. You've been trying to break that entanglement. We realized the entanglement itself wasn't the problem. The problem was where it led. So we gave it somewhere better to go. They watched as the plague migrated from the infected network into the sanctuary. Chancellor Vera's translator couldn't fully convey her emotional response, but her body language spoke volumes. And perhaps a touch of fear. How long did this take you to develop? She asked. 6 months of focused work, Hikaru replied. But it was built on 90 years of quantum research that we conducted in isolation. This is... Vera struggled for words. This is extraordinary. A problem that has plagued us for centuries, solved in months. We can deploy the sanctuary throughout Concordat space within a year, Hikaru said. Free of charge. No strings attached. Consider it humanity's gift to the galactic community that once rejected us. The delegation departed 2 weeks later, having witnessed multiple demonstrations of the sanctuary technology. Chancellor Vera requested a private meeting with Director Okonkwo before leaving. Your species has changed dramatically, Vera said, standing in Okonkwo's office overlooking New Vancouver's thriving cityscape. The humans we rejected 90 years ago were divided, struggling, uncertain of their place in the galaxy. You are none of those things now. You gave us a reason to unite, Amara replied. And time to grow without outside interference. In a way, the rejection was the best thing that could have happened to us. I was on the council when the vote happened, Vera admitted. I voted against you. I believed humanity was too dangerous, too unpredictable. I was wrong. You weren't dangerous because you were violent. You were dangerous because you had unlimited potential, and we were afraid of what you might become. And now that you've seen what we've become? Amara asked. Now I'm even more afraid, Vera said honestly. But also, hopeful. The galaxy has been stagnant for millennia. We've been maintaining what we have rather than striving for what we could achieve. You've reminded us that progress is possible. That innovation doesn't end just because a civilization is old. We have 7 years until the 100-year mark, Amara said. What happens then? I will propose that the Concordat extend an invitation for humanity to join. Not as petitioners seeking membership, but as equals being welcomed home. I cannot guarantee the vote will pass. There are still many who fear you. But I will try. And if it doesn't pass? Amara asked. Vera met her gaze steadily. Then humanity will continue as an independent power, and the Concordat will have to adjust to a galaxy that includes a civilization it can neither control nor ignore. Perhaps that's what we need most, competition. A reminder that we are not the pinnacle of possibility. After Vera left, Amara stood at her window looking at the city below. New Vancouver had been raw wilderness just 70 years ago. Now it hosted 5 million people and some of the most advanced research facilities in known space. It was a monument to human determination. But the work wasn't finished. 7 years remained. 7 years to prepare for whatever came next. The reckoning. The 98th year of isolation arrived with humanity at the peak of its power. The empire that had started with one sanctioned system now encompassed 74 star systems, hosting a population of 11 billion across dozens of worlds. Human ships traveled routes that had been unknown to the Concordat. Human technology had advanced so far beyond galactic standards that comparison was difficult. But more importantly, humanity had transformed itself culturally. The species that had nearly destroyed its own homeworld through war and environmental negligence now exemplified sustainable development and peaceful cooperation. Every human child learned about the rejection, as it was called, and what it had taught them. That external validation meant nothing compared to self-determination. Admiral Marcus Webb, now in his 70s but still sharp, stood on the bridge of the Indomitable II, the flagship of humanity's defense fleet. Around him, the largest gathering of human military vessels ever assembled hung in formation. 3,000 ships, from massive carriers to small fighters, all equipped with technology that would have seemed impossible a century ago. All vessels report ready, Admiral, Commander Zara Patel said. She had been promoted to Vice Admiral but still served as Webb's second in command. Together, they had built humanity's military from nothing into a force that rivaled the combined might of the Concordat. Stand by, Marcus ordered. We wait for the signal. On Earth, in the same chamber where Kalen Vras had once received humanity's rejection, Director Amara Okonkwo prepared to address not just humanity, but the entire galaxy. The Concordat had agreed to broadcast her speech through their communication networks. Billions of beings across hundreds of worlds would hear what she had to say. She thought of Kalen, who hadn't lived to see this moment. He had died peacefully in his sleep 5 years ago, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that his life's work had not been in vain. His last words to her had been simple: make them regret it. We're live in 30 seconds, her aide informed her. Amara took a deep breath. She wore formal attire but not of any Concordat style. It was distinctly human, elegant but practical, decorated with symbols representing every human colony world. She was not dressed to impress aliens. She was dressed to represent her species with dignity. The cameras activated. Amara looked directly into them and began to speak. 100 years ago, humanity stood before the Galactic Concordat and asked to be accepted as equals. We had ended our wars. We had begun to heal our planet. We had reached beyond our world to touch the stars. We believed we were ready to join the galactic community. She paused, letting the weight of history settle. The Concordat voted. 468 species rejected us. We were called too violent, too destructive, too young. We were sanctioned, isolated, contained. We were told to wait 1,000 years until we had evolved beyond our primitive nature. Another pause. On worlds across the galaxy, beings watched with rapt attention. This was the moment they had known was coming, the reckoning 98 years in the making. We decided not to wait. Instead we built. We discovered. We grew. We transformed ourselves not to meet your standards but to exceed them. And now, 100 years later, I stand before you not to ask for acceptance, but to announce what we have become. Behind her, holographic displays activated, showing humanity's achievements. 74 systems. Advanced technology. Thriving colonies. The cure for the Nexus plague, now deployed throughout Concordat space, saving countless lives and trillions in economic damage. We are no longer the species you rejected. We are something new. Something you didn't expect. And we owe you a debt of gratitude. That statement caused a stir in the Concordat Council chambers, where the delegates had gathered to watch. You gave us the greatest gift any species could receive, the motivation to prove you wrong. You forced us to be self-reliant, creative, determined. You gave us a challenge and we rose to meet it. So thank you. Thank you for your rejection. Thank you for your fear. Thank you for teaching us that we don't need your validation to be great. Amara's expression hardened slightly, her next words carrying an edge. But gratitude aside, we will not forget what happened. The Concordat looked at humanity and saw only our flaws, our history, our mistakes. You couldn't see our potential. You couldn't imagine that a young species might offer something new to a galaxy grown comfortable in its ancient ways. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. Today I make two announcements. First, humanity formally declines any future invitation to join the Galactic Concordat as it currently exists. We have no interest in joining an organization that judges species by age rather than capability, that fears innovation instead of embracing it. The Concordat chamber erupted in shocked discussion. Chancellor Vera raised her hand for silence, but even she looked stunned. Second, humanity extends an invitation to any species, any world, any government that shares our vision of progress over stagnation, of merit over tradition, to join us in a new alliance. We call it the Coalition for Progressive Worlds. Membership will be open to all who meet basic standards of ethics and capability, regardless of their age as a spacefaring civilization. On displays throughout Concordat space, the symbol of the new coalition appeared, a stylized human hand reaching toward a star, surrounded by geometric patterns representing different species. We do not seek to replace the Concordat, Amara continued. We seek to offer an alternative. Competition breeds excellence. The galaxy is large enough for multiple visions of civilization. Let the best approach win. She straightened, her final words ringing with certainty. To those who rejected us, you were right to fear us. Not because we are violent or destructive, but because we represent change. We represent the possibility that old ways are not always best ways. We represent the future whether you're ready for it or not. To those who might join us, welcome. Together we will build something extraordinary. Something that honors the best of what civilization can be, without being bound by the mistakes of the past. Humanity has spent 100 years earning its place in the galaxy. That place is not at your table asking permission to exist. That place is at our own table, extending an invitation to any who dare to imagine something better. She paused one final time, then delivered her conclusion. The era of humanity as supplicants is over. The era of humanity as equals has begun. The only question is whether the rest of the galaxy is wise enough to recognize that reality. The transmission ended. Amara stood alone on the stage for a moment, then turned and walked away. She had said everything that needed saying. Now the galaxy would respond, and humanity would deal with whatever came next. In the Concordat Council chamber, chaos reigned. Representatives shouted over each other, some demanding immediate military action, others calling for diplomatic engagement, still others suggesting they simply ignore humanity's declaration. Chancellor Vera finally managed to restore order. We need to vote, she said. The question before us is simple. How do we respond to humanity's challenge? Challenge? Representative Korch snarled. This is an insult. They dare to reject us after we graciously considered curing their plague? They cured it for free, Ambassador Lyron pointed out. They deployed the sanctuary technology throughout our space without asking for anything in return. And now they've offered an alternative to our organization. That's not an insult. That's competition. Competition we cannot afford to lose, added Representative Thace. If even a few dozen species join this coalition, the balance of power in the galaxy shifts dramatically. Then we ensure they fail, Korch said. We impose sanctions on any world that joins them. We deny them access to slipspace routes. We isolate them economically. That's what we did to humanity, Vera said quietly. And look how that turned out. The chamber fell silent as that truth sank in. We have three options, Vera continued. We can fight, attempting to suppress this new coalition before it gains strength. We can ignore them, pretending humanity's challenge doesn't matter. Or we can adapt, reforming the Concordat to address the legitimate criticisms humanity has raised. Reform. Korch looked appalled. We functioned successfully for 10,000 years. Successfully doesn't mean perfectly, Vera countered. Humanity is right that we've become stagnant. When was the last time a truly revolutionary technology emerged from within the Concordat? When was the last time we solved a problem we'd been struggling with for centuries? We've been maintaining, not advancing. Humanity spent 100 years and surpassed our 10,000. That should terrify us into action, not defiance. What do you propose? Asked a delegate from the Qin Collective. I propose we acknowledge that humanity has earned the right to reshape galactic civilization. We can either be part of that reshaping or we can be left behind. I vote that we open formal diplomatic relations with the Coalition for Progressive Worlds, not as adversaries but as potential partners. The vote that followed was not unanimous. Many species, particularly the older ones, voted against any accommodation with humanity. But when the crystals lit up, there were enough blue lights to pass Vera's motion. The Galactic Concordat had officially recognized the Coalition for Progressive Worlds. Within 6 months, 37 species had applied to join the coalition. Some were minor worlds the Concordat had barely noticed. Others were significant powers dissatisfied with their limited influence in the traditional hierarchy. And a few were Concordat members who requested dual citizenship in both organizations. Humanity welcomed them all, judging each applicant on its merits rather than its history. The coalition's membership standards were strict but fair. Environmental stewardship, ethical treatment of sentient beings, demonstrated technological capability, and a commitment to progress. We're not building an empire, Amara explained during the first coalition summit, held on New Vancouver. We're building a community of civilizations that share common values and goals. The Concordat can continue as it is. We offer an alternative, not a replacement. But everyone knew the truth. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted. The Concordat would never be the same. The new dawn. The 10th anniversary of the Coalition for Progressive Worlds fell on a date humans called Unity Day. It had been 110 years since the rejection, and the galaxy looked nothing like it had a century before. Dr. Elias Kane, now ancient even by the standards of modern medicine, stood in the same laboratory where he had developed the resonance drive. Around him, his grandchildren, all brilliant scientists in their own right, worked on projects that made his accomplishments seem quaint. Grandfather, said Maya Kane, his eldest granddaughter, the dimensional gateway is ready for testing. Elias shuffled over to the viewing window. Below, in a massive chamber, a ring of exotic matter blazed with captured energy. The gateway was humanity's latest breakthrough, a permanent faster-than-light pathway that could connect distant parts of the galaxy instantly. Not ships traveling through space, but space itself being bent to bring two locations together. When you activate it, Elias asked, where will it connect to? Alpha Centauri for the first test, Maya replied. Then, if successful, we'll build gateways to every coalition world. Imagine it, grandfather. Instant travel across the entire galaxy. No ships, no fuel, no time. Just step through a gateway and be anywhere. Elias felt tears in his eyes. He had spent his life pushing the boundaries of physics, and now his family was doing the same. This was humanity's legacy. Never satisfied, always reaching for the next breakthrough. Activate the gateway, he said softly. The ring ignited. Space within it twisted, folded, and suddenly wasn't a ring at all but a window. Through it, they could see Alpha Centauri Station with stunned personnel staring back at them. Gateway stable, Arya announced. Connection successful. Transit time, instantaneous. Maya hugged her grandfather as the rest of the team cheered. Another impossible thing made possible. Another limit exceeded. Another step toward a future their ancestors could only dream of. Elsewhere in Coalition space, Admiral Marcus Webb had retired, passing command of the defense fleet to a younger generation. But he still served as an advisor, and today he was giving a lecture at the Coalition Military Academy on New Shanghai. The Concordat asked us once why we invested so heavily in military technology, he told the cadets, human and alien alike. They suggested it proved we were too violent to be trusted. But that's not why we built weapons. We built them because we learned the hardest lesson a species can learn. Safety cannot be negotiated from a position of weakness. He gestured to a holographic display showing the current political map of the galaxy. The coalition has never fired a shot in anger. We've never invaded anyone. We've never threatened anyone. But everyone knows that if threatened we could defend ourselves absolutely. That's not aggression. That's deterrence. And deterrence keeps the peace. One of the cadets, a young Etherian, raised her hand. Admiral, do you think the Concordat regrets rejecting humanity? Marcus considered the question. Some of them do. Chancellor Vera has said publicly that the rejection was a mistake. But I don't think about it in terms of regret. I think about it in terms of opportunity. They gave us a century to become something extraordinary. We took that opportunity. Whether they regret their choice doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what we do with the civilization we've built. In the Concordat Council chambers, Chancellor Vera was having a similar conversation with her advisors. Public opinion polls show that 62% of Concordat citizens now view the coalition favorably, one advisor reported. 31% believe the Concordat should have accepted humanity's original application. And 12% are calling for the Concordat to dissolve and all members to join the coalition. Vera absorbed this information with calm acceptance. The coalition has shown us what we could have been if we'd chosen innovation over tradition. We can't undo the past, but we can learn from it. What do you recommend? Asked another advisor. Full partnership, Vera said. The Concordat and coalition should work together, not as rival organizations but as complementary ones. The Concordat brings stability, tradition, and established diplomatic frameworks. The coalition brings innovation, dynamism, and fresh perspectives. Together, we could create something better than either organization alone. That would require significant reform of Concordat structures, the first advisor warned. Then we reform, Vera said firmly. Humanity spent 100 years proving that change is possible and necessary. It's time we learned that lesson. The proposal for formal partnership between the Concordat and coalition was debated for 2 years. In the end, it passed with a surprising majority. The two organizations would remain separate but would coordinate on major issues, share technologies, and allow dual citizenship. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, disagreements, and different visions of how galactic civilization should function. But it was progress. On Earth, now a carefully preserved historical site with a population kept intentionally small, a monument stood in the place where the United Earth Council had first received news of the rejection. It was a simple structure, a mirror-bright column reaching toward the sky, with a single inscription at its base. They said we needed 1,000 years. We took 100. Let this monument remind all who see it. Limitations exist only in the minds of those who accept them. Dr. Mira Chen, now 124 years old and the oldest living human, stood before that monument on Unity Day. Around her, millions had gathered, human and alien alike, to celebrate the anniversary of the coalition's founding. She had been there at the beginning, standing beside Kalen when the rejection came. She had been there through the dark early years. And she was here now, witnessing a galaxy transformed. We did it, she said softly, speaking to Kalen though he'd been dead for 15 years. We proved them wrong. We became something magnificent. A young human approached, barely 20 years old. Dr. Chin? I'm writing my thesis on the Centennial Project. May I ask you a question? Of course, Mira said, smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. Do you think humanity would have achieved all this if the Concordat had accepted us originally? Mira thought about that, really thought about it. No, she finally said. If they'd accepted us, we would have become like them. Comfortable, stagnant, satisfied with incremental progress. The rejection was a gift, though it didn't feel like one at the time. It forced us to be better than we thought possible. So you're grateful? The girl asked, surprised. I'm grateful for what we became, Mira clarified. Not for the pain it took to get here. Thousands died in the early years. Families were torn apart. Dreams were destroyed. But from that suffering we built something permanent. Something worth all the sacrifice. She gestured to the sky, where human and alien ships traveled freely between the stars, where gateways connected distant worlds, where the impossible had become routine. We were told we were too dangerous, too flawed, too young. They were wrong. Not because we didn't have flaws, but because they underestimated our capacity to overcome them. That's the real lesson. Any species, any civilization, any individual can exceed expectations if they refuse to accept limitations. The girl thanked her and moved away. Mira stood alone for a moment longer, looking up at the monument. The galaxy had changed. Humanity had changed. And the change was just beginning. Far from Earth, in a newly constructed coalition station orbiting a previously unexplored region of space, Explorers prepared to push beyond the boundaries of known territory. The mission commander, Captain Zhenlu, addressed his crew. For 10,000 years, the Concordat explored conservatively, mapping territory slowly, expanding cautiously. We're going to do it differently. We're going to rush headlong into the unknown because that's what humans do. We don't wait for permission to discover. We don't ask if it's safe. We venture forward because the unknown is where all the interesting things hide. The ship, named Kalen Vras in honor of the ambassador who had endured humanity's rejection, activated its resonance drive and vanished into the darkness beyond charted space. Behind them, the civilized galaxy continued its work. Trade flourished. Technology advanced. Species that had never interacted before now collaborated on projects that benefited everyone. The Concordat learned from the Coalition's innovations. The Coalition learned from the Concordat's stability. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was better. And that, ultimately, was the point. 100 years ago, humanity had been rejected because they were imperfect. Now, they had built a civilization that acknowledged imperfection but refused to be limited by it. The galaxy had voted against humans. 100 years later, the galaxy itself had changed because of them. And the journey was just beginning.